So I'm up here on Clybourne, and then I'm going to shoot down Sheffield, which you've seen these videos before. And basically, this is heading down towards DePaul University. So I don't know how DePaul is expanding out its graduate school, but I did have a friend of mine. He graduated from DePaul Graduate School, Brian Cole, and then another friend of mine, which I forgot his name. He was a black kid who I used to interact with a lot. He hung out at Starbucks, and I gave him my CFA stuff, and he was into, I think, factoring and collections. I forget, but he ended up, I went to a thing for DePaul looking at their MBA program, and he was in the room as well, and I guess he graduated his master's from DePaul University. He's a good kid, good guy. So anyways, the reason I'm saying that is I'm wondering how they're building out their graduate programs, and then what University of Arizona didn't do well is intertwine graduate life into campus life as well. There was one bar that was on 4th Avenue that was owned by a University of Arizona student who opened it up, and it was where all the graduate students tended to hang out. It was a much more sophisticated bar, more of a lounge type bar, with, I think, some pool tables and that. But, it was more for, not slamming shots and all that, but more for a mature, mid-20 type people, graduate school people that are a little later in their 20s. And so, anyways, how they're building out their graduate type programs. University of Chicago, it's very graduate school oriented. I think University of Chicago is by ratio, one of the largest top-heavy schools, where it's very heavy into the master's programs and PhD programs, and then research fellows, and it's lighter on its undergraduate side. So most universities are very big undergraduate and smaller graduate. Well, the University of Chicago is very big in its graduate and fellowship and smaller undergraduate. It's the reverse university in that way. Now they've done some things to try to grow its undergraduate recently, but DePaul opening up a medical school would expand its graduate program, because that's the master's level, a medical school, and teaming up with Rush for, residency, and Rush doctors can teach at DePaul's medical school. Truly. And I'm right by the Blue Demons basketball. And what did I watch on WGN all the time? DePaul had an exclusive contract with WGN. If people don't remember, I'm listening to WGN radio, but they had an exclusive contract with WGN. And so I grew up watching Ray Myers and DePaul basketball, and I was really into DePaul basketball. And I probably would have ended up going to DePaul, but the thing is, they don't have a football program. And so I was looking to play football in college. And also, number 2, the basketball program went to shit. So when I was a child, I watched on WGN, and I was big into DePaul. It would go into attorney Mark Aguirre. Yeah, Dallas Comegys was later, and so on. But under Joey Meyer, he couldn't recruit. I thought Joey Meyer, good coach, but he couldn't recruit any talent. He was a horrible recruiter, Joey Meyer. I think, a very good coach. In a way, better than his father in some ways. But his father could recruit. His father, unlike Joey Meyer, look at Ray Meyer and go back in the video, dressing in a suit, very charismatic, very good in front of the camera, smiling. Ray was always smiling on the bench, win or lose. And he just had a very good personality. And so he's very charismatic, warm, friendly. And so it allowed him to recruit. Joey Meyer was, I think, much more technical than his father. He studied under his father. He took over. But the problem is, he rolled his sleeves up and he didn't wear a jacket, and then he just wore, the shirt with the tie, and he had no clothing sense. He was a very poor dresser. He wore glasses. His hair was not the greatest, and so on. And he wasn't good with the press. Not very charismatic. And so DePaul couldn't recruit anymore. It wasn't coaching talent. The best coaching talent in the world, if you can't recruit, you're not going to go anywhere. You can get the most out of those players, but you need decent players, and he was really getting more of the bottom of the barrel. Now here's Kirkwood. It's a tavern over here, and it's with Indiana. There's a lot of University of Indiana. Where's the DePaul Tavern? McGee's closed down, and it could have had all the DePaul games. Now, Kirkwood does DePaul, and it's Nebraska Hoosiers, Chicago Bears. Where is the DePaul Tavern? Where is the sports bar that does DePaul University? Truly. Maybe one of them at Wrigley Field could host. I don't know about DePaul's baseball team. The one thing that was very good, and that's where these city colleges, even Columbia College in New York, and NYU in New York, the thing is, they suffer from facilities where you get Tucson and the University of Arizona, and what do you get? The football stadium on campus, the basketball stadium on campus, the baseball stadium on campus, the swimming arena and stadium on campus, all within a distance from each other, the women's softball stadium on campus. And so it creates a very centralized place for the students, and it creates an incredible campus life. And this is what things that are missing, because the University of Arizona, the med school's on campus, the research is on campus, all the graduate schools are on campus. One campus. And it's positioned correctly in Tucson. And so it creates for an incredible environment. I went and looked at UCLA and USC and so on. And again, they're broken up. You don't get the same type of feel. And that's the problem with DePaul. And it's missing pieces. Where does its baseball team play? Now, a better thing is UIC, and if I was the president of the University of Illinois Chicago, that land to the west of it, I would be scooping up, because that area right now is not valued that high. And so UIC can buy up shitloads of land and create the University of Arizona experience at UIC. UIC has that ability. And they could buy up tons of land behind it to create a sports complex right there on campus. And I would invest in UIC. My nephew Adam went to the University of Illinois, Chicago. He graduated a double major. I wanted him to get a minor in math, but he, didn't take enough courses to be a double major and a minor. But he graduated with physics and engineering. And then Dalton was his roommate. He's a great kid. He graduated engineering. I don't know if he graduated as a double major as well, but very bright kid. And the thing is, I'm a big fan of UIC, but UIC has never had any type of, sports recognition. And I guess the DePaul Blue Demons girls basketball team is good, but I don't see that on WGN. And I'm really talking about how WGN used to be this centralized power for Chicago, and how it competed with the big boys is it had DePaul Blue Demons, and they were decent. Every year they were fairly good, and I watched a lot of it growing up. And then I could watch all the Cubs games. I watched a ton of Cubs games on WGN. And then later they got the Blackhawks in that, and then I think the White Sox were on there. But the thing is, they used to have, the Cubs was their staple. And when Sam Zell was there, before the Ricketts, I think at one time they took over the Cubs from the Wrigleys, and the Tribune owned the Chicago Cubs for a while. But the thing is, it used to be their anchor point. It's just like TBS. I used to watch on TBS the Atlanta Hawks, the basketball team, and the Atlanta Braves on TBS. And it used to be free TV. You can turn the dial. And I grew up watching that. They're another superstation. WGN's a superstation. TBS is a superstation. They could merge, meaning in a partnership, and help each other out. These two superstations could come together. And I think it would be a good merging of their two networks, and I think Ted Turner would be for it. But it gives them a newspaper and many other avenues, and it can further give them radio stations, which I don't know if they have any radio stations. And so it could be emerging where they benefit each other in demographics, but they should be deep into their market. Like WGN should be very deep into Chicago. So they should get contracts with UIC, DePaul, Northwestern, and those are the big programs, University of Illinois, and air the games on WGN. Now they're doing stuff, but they're doing stuff outside of this market. And the funny thing is, Chicago has a great base. One of the things that was positive, and if you don't know this, that Chicago lost so many millions of people, they didn't disappear. They're spread into Florida, into New York, into Arizona, into California. And then Chicago has all these great institutions, colleges, that all these people are spread around the country. And they're actually ended up being Chicago sports fans. And they're interested in things in Chicago because they spent all those years going to school and that in the city of Chicago. So it makes it very easy for them to turn into WGN and see things about Chicago. Atlanta has the same capability, and it makes them unique. They go much deeper into Chicago roots. And so I think they're doing it all wrong. And I understand the News Nation and that. But they're drifting from their core. And I understand them, the love golf and everything else. But do you know how many golf courses we have here in Chicago? And did they sign up for the tournaments that the PGA comes into Chicago? WGN can air the tournaments that come in Chicago. My friend Joe, his family owns golf courses, and they have the PGA Tour comes to his course every year. They have one of the prominent golf courses in the country here in the Chicagoland area, and they could get the contract to air that from the PGA. So, again, they could air these things Chicago. So there's a lot of diversity they can get, but I don't understand where they're going. They're drifting from their base. And again, all these people, the one good thing is that all the people that we lost are spread all over, and they have a fondness of Chicago. Even on MASH, the one episode I shared on Facebook, Hawkeye orders barbecue ribs from Chicago. And they have them flown all the way out to Korea. And they have the big thing of sauce and the ribs and everything else. And I forget the name of the rib joint. But we have some famous barbecue places in Chicago. So the whole point I'm making is there's a great base of people that used to be here outside of here. And so tapping into that distribution, they would buy the Tribune, and they can do an exclusive with the CBO, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, the Chicago Board of Trade, the Mercantile Mark, and that. And they can get some exclusive reporting so their financial page can build out and be incredibly informative. And now the Mercantile Exchange, I think, is owner of the expansion in Texas and that. And then they have some global digital markets. But why not tap into your core and build out your financial reporting and everything? And then we have the Forex markets, we have the future markets, you have the swap markets, and they can really build out the financial section and then build out the in-depth by adding college sections to WGN, more extensive college reporting. And then you can pair up with the Deerfield Review and others to get articles from high school and elementary school, where you can share that on your online, and in your paper you can put some blurbs about high school games. But say if you want more, you can go to our webpage, and then they can have these small papers like the Deerfield Review and others. So they have to figure out, they're up here at the macro, and they need to figure out how to integrate some of the micro into it to build out. And it's the same thing as the Sun-Times and that. So you have to figure out how to build out your core, and the paper that's in the burbs is the Daily News, that tends to have much more suburban information. But again, there's this ability for them to build out correctly, and so they should be really pumping the universities here throughout the state of Illinois. And so, again, airing them through WGN, and then, if not on the TV station, some on the radio, but also you can get a whole host of them online. And it can build out their dominance. And there's people all over. There's alumni all over the world that like to tap in. Like, every time the University of Arizona is on TV, I want to watch it. I used to run around Chicago trying to figure out who was playing the football games and basketball games and that. Because that's where I graduated from college, undergraduate. And so, again, people do view this, and I don't know where any of the DePaul bars are or the UIC bars for their alumni. I know we got a lot of out-of-state, like they have the Hoosiers. There's a lot of Nebraska people, kids, students here. A lot of Indiana. A lot of other universities that aren't in Illinois. But it seems like we missed the Illinois. And so, again, where's this hometown? WGN used to be this like hometown feeling, like TBS, Atlanta, and it focused, throughout the South. So, again, I think they would work together pretty perfectly, but there's exclusive stuff that they can do. They can build out its medical section. And you say not reporting. We have a huge medical device and medical research and pharmaceutical industry here in Illinois. And we have huge agricultural industry. And then you have experimental agriculture. I would assume I don't know, Arizona had a lot of it. And I would assume UVI and others are into experimental agriculture and farming. And now we have the buildings downtown that are doing the indoor hydroponic farming. So there's really a lot going on when you say, and so why should all the negativity constantly lead in the news? So, there's so much other things to report on. It's unbelievable. We have Elk Grove, which is the largest industrial park outside of Saudi Arabia. But if you add on Wheeling and our other industrial parks, Illinois might have the largest amount of industrial parks. I mean, if you add them together, it's pretty immense. So I have to look it up. I know outside of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia has the largest single industrial park. Elk Grove is second to it in size. But there's a lot going on. I used to work in Elk Grove at Suncast, and I did injection molding, and we made holes in reels and many other things. So there's a lot going on. Then we have all the culinary schools, and we're the leader in the world in the packaged food industry and many others, but they don't bring up any of that on the news. It's a way for the news to promote these industries, to build out awareness. And it also promotes people wanting to come to Chicago. Meaning, seeing these things going on, you got to recruit talent from around the world. So WGN has to understand that. Advertising dollars in that. Selling the negativity doesn't bring you advertising dollars. What brings you are these industries, and these industries from manufacturing to, we have We were leaders in skyscrapers and architecture and many other things. We were one of the leaders in the world in architecture. And so all these industries bring in bread and butter, and they need the recruit. And so you have to understand that. I'm not saying that you don't report here and there, but the news should be full of what's going on, that people can see from WGN all the different stuff to do in Chicago, and why somebody from Harvard or MIT or from Oxford or from a top university in Japan, would want to come to Chicago. And portraying all the Japanese cuisine or all the Korean. I spent so much time with kids from Korea that were going to school in Chicago. Educational tourism. But the thing is, they don't talk about the Korean scene in Chicago. And I'm not against diversification, but the whole point is that we have to do things right. And illegal immigration and over-immigration really screwed things up, where we would have more educational and business immigration. Like when I worked at the Marriott Courtyard in the 90s, we had lots of Japanese business people coming in constantly because they had lots of things in Chicago, all kinds of business incubators in Chicago. From Japan, they had all kinds of businesses. And that went away. And that's how we should have went, but we decided to flood everything in. And we had uncontrolled immigration from the south up. And it's not only the Great Migration, they miss it. You remember all the hurricanes down south? Well, if you look at the pattern, lots of minorities, blacks again, with the hurricanes and everything in Louisiana, when they were back-to-back, the huge ones along the southern borders, they flooded up north into Chicago and everything. So we got a second surge of the Great Migration. Instead of incentivizing the government to rebuild, like I went with Harry Connick Jr. thing, how to build houses on stilts, but I went differently. It looks ugly. The parking structure, the garage is on the ground floor. It puts the house on the second story, 10 feet above, and with the right material in that, and the garage having, these systems to be able to let out the water, sewer systems in the garage. Oh yeah, the basin of the garage has all these drainage systems. So if you have a good drainage system and it floods and the garage is made of the right material, the water comes in and then it goes back out and it's easy to clean up. So you have this new permanent flooring, the coatings and everything. And so you make it waterproof. It's all sealed. It's all waterproof. And you make it that way, and then they should have incentivized them to go back freaking home. But what happened with FEMA and that, they got into the trailers, and then they just migrated up. And that was bad for the South. They had big loss in revenue. And it took forever for Orleans and these southern communities to rebuild. And you had a lot of vacant structures, and it was just horrible down south because of it. They didn't incentivize them to go back. And that made the immigration thing really unbalanced, because we had this fluctuation because of these natural disasters. And where I watched it was what happened in California. You had the earthquake, then you had mudslides, and then you had great forest fires, then you had droughts. And what happened? One of the first things that moved out is all the criminals. And I pointed this out on Facebook, how Denver started getting all these California gangs, even Samoan gangs that were hardcore, that been around that they never had, and they moved out of California eastward because the stability in Arizona, the stability in Nevada, the stability in Utah, the stability in Colorado, and that, they weren't experiencing all the downturn that California was from all these different natural disasters. That's why I wrote a lot to California, how to solve all those problems so they wouldn't have this great exodus out of California. And they weren't passing on all their negativity. The first people to leave and expand it were the criminal organizations. They left first. Then the good people came behind. But it caused an incredible, on the West Coast, away from the ocean on the other side, all those states had unbelievable boom in criminal activity. Truly, more illegal drugs coming through Arizona, more illegal drugs coming through Texas, and it pushed it away from California. And they started feeding up through the South. So Florida pushed it eastward, and California pushed it to the middle. So you had the East pushing it west, and you had the West, all the Border Patrol stuff and finding the tunnels. And where happened? It ended up in the center of the country, and Chicago became the central distribution for the Sinaloa cartel and others. Because everybody forced their garbage into the center. And that's where we got the great migration of Hispanics and everything. Yes, the cartels opened up pathways, and a lot of those people came in. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them came in because they weren't educated. And when you're not educated, you can't get a good job. Working for gangs, working for cartels, that's freaking great money. And so it made it easy for them to expand. But the thing is, it really crowded out the good stuff, where people would come up from down south for educational tourism or business training and then go back. And so it surely shifted the whole dynamics. And so it didn't end up being what it should have. And because I could study this, because I was at Arizona on the West Coast, and then I studied the stuff from the hurricanes along the southern, watching what happened with them as well, and also their criminal activity from the south moved through the Midwest. And that's why we ended up getting the murder capital, because of breaking up the projects is one, but we also moved in all these criminal organizations got pushed up this way because all the hurricanes and that interrupted all their business. They wanted to be in the Midwest because it's very stable. They weren't down south in Illinois where the tornadoes happen. They moved up to the north where the weather, you might have some snowstorms here and there, but it's not a huge interruption like a hurricane where it wipes out businesses and that. So the snow's plowed away and operations continue. So it was a logistic stability that the Midwest gave that they couldn't get on the West Coast. They weren't getting down south because of weather. They weren't getting on the East Coast in Florida, again, because of hurricanes and other interruptions. So they poured into the center of the country because it created great stability. Year-round operations, no natural disasters, no forest fires, mudslides, earthquakes, highways getting wiped out. Truly, the plows are out, and the next day the highways are back open. Now it's even faster, but it created this incredible distribution hub. And so, again, we had a problem with all those storms. All the bad people funneled up this way. And it made this like the distribution point for all evil because of its stability. So we didn't control any of that because they didn't control the borders. And Illinois and the Midwest, I think, can have a class action lawsuit against border states for not controlling their borders and kicking their problem onto us. Literally. Truly. The Midwest region of governors can sue them for all the freaking damage they've done, and it's incredible. So, again, they kicked all their shit right into the heartland. But again, you have to understand all of what's going on and what it did and why they relocated up here. It was pure stability. It made a perfect feeding ground, as it was why Chicago was built, for all those criminal organizations. But the Chicago police don't know this. And so we got all this in, and we got huge amounts of illegals and everything else. And they were able to tap into that illegal labor to build out their networks because they offered better wages. You make more money, you don't have to wash dishes and everything else, and you selling cocaine and heroin and everything else, and you're making shitloads of money, and you're going out to the bars, and you're eating meals, and you're living in nice homes, and you're living way above your ability to earn. That's why people go the criminal route, because they have an easy way to earn more than they deserve. And so it's easy to steal and rise. And so what happened was we got the wrong things. Even money laundering in that, lots of it in Chicagoland, and counterfeit money, as we busted at Excalibur, a guy distributing, but we got a lot of counterfeit money. We got a lot of criminals, that we got a lot of gypsies that were, it was amazing how they just flooded in. And so you have to understand this. We need to change this. And we need to control the narrative. And so implementing things for commercial and residents, where banks and that, they have to do the background checks. Extensive, making it mandatory throughout the state. Should be incredibly difficult in the Midwest to do criminal activity, protecting and purging. So they need to change the laws, and they really need to drill down, because that's the only way you get rid of the infestation. That's the only way you break them and force them to change. So you have to pull out and expose the wolf in sheep's clothing. You got to take off the sheep's clothing and expose them for the wolf that they are. But the Chicago police have no idea of how all this shit ends up. As I'm watching CTA Security. So you have to understand where it's coming from to stop the pipeline. The guns and that, all the cartels and all the criminal families, well, they're big on carrying weapons. So again, you have to understand these things, and I've watched this across the country, how this dynamic has changed, and we have a serious problem. We need to get back to promoting the right things and having the right people coming in for the right reasons, extending our ties with Japan and many other nations around the world, and having people come here for business and education and tourism and that, the right people, and funneling our expansion the right way with only legal labor that is skilled. So again, we need to change things and go back to where it can be incredible here. So you have to force the narrative. You can't let them drive you. You need to drive them. So make no mistake about it. And they've been driving all the wrong narratives, which has caused a serious problem. Unbelievable. I had my friend Mike Whitehead die multiple times on the table. My brother Richard, illegal drugs killed him. Alcohol, but illegal drugs. So I have a lot of people that these things destroyed their life. And you look on the south side, crack and everything else. And then it floods in, and I'm listening to the overdoses in Chicago is just incredible. And so, again, you got to understand what went on the coast and why it flooded into the Midwest and why they found it to be the perfect place to grow and distribute all kinds of criminal activity. So we have to change the narrative, and the government needs to incentivize people to do the right thing. And so if they see a shifting in demographics that's happening too much, they have to shore up the system and stop the bleeding, stabilizing the population. There can be people move around, but moving around for the right reasons. That wasn't happening. People are leaving California because they were having all kinds of problems, and then they were driving property tax and everything else through the roof. So people are leaving to Texas. And then Texas started having all the border issues and everything else. And it's just a nightmare. So getting back to WGN, we need to build out the city in the right way in the state and the Midwest. Getting back to I'm watching U.S. Foods. The CFO of U.S. Foods was a girl I dealt with at CARA, Chicago Runners Association. His daughter worked for there, but U.S. Food didn't get into, the running food for, runners, like GU and sports drinks and, Cliff bars and everything, but they could have had a perfect partnership with Chicago Area Runners Association and getting into that type of things. We have Bank of America, who does the Shamrock Shuffle, the half marathon, the full marathon, and everything else. So, again, I'm here by Wrigley Field. And so, getting back to DePaul and that, and like I said, UIC has the ability to buy up land west of it and truly build out a true complex. And so does IIT. That's why I want the White Sox to move. I want Illinois Institute of Technology to be able to sweep up a lot of land, get rid of the stadium, relocate the Sox, because you not move IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, it's easier to move the Chicago White Sox and allow them to absorb all that land and build out, just like Moody College, and build out. They have all that land that's in back of them that's still available to build out Moody College from Cabrini Green. And then the Robert Taylor homes and all that by Comiskey left land where Illinois Institute of Technology can build out. And University of Chicago has been looking to build out in Hyde Park more. That brings business, tourism, research, and everything, and that propels into every other industry in the state. And so we need to retool, refocus on how we're growing. And that makes for better environments, and then the entertainment factor and the lifestyle needs to coincide. And that's the culinary scene, which is getting much better, because as these industries drive, like Boeing moving here, all their executives, you're talking mid six figures, $200,000 and up positions, a large amount of them moving into Chicago. It was all of its executive. It left all its blue collar back in Seattle. And it moved all its white collar to Chicago. And those people made shitloads of money. And so it pumped a lot of money into the city of Chicago, demanding for high-end residencies and everything. And that feeds into the culinary scene. And what happens? All the people that work in the culinary scene make tons more money. So it's a trickle down, and it raises up the people in the culinary scene. So waiters and all that are eventually, like at Gibson's, the bartender making six-figure plus incomes. Six-figure plus incomes. That's what they were making at Gibson's. Six-figure plus. So, very lucrative positions. And thinks I'm talking about that, Morton Steakhouse going into the Hard Rock Casino and pairing up. That's Peter Morton that started the Hard Rocks and the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, and his father owned Morton Steakhouse, and they have Morton Arboretum. But Morton's can move in and be a proper pairing. But that's a Chicago very own, Morton Steakhouse. And so, again, you have to understand what has been going on in the dynamics so we can move forward in a better way. And we could have built out in Mexico, and we didn't have to have illegal immigration if we would have built out over there instead of trying to suck the labor in here. We used a satellite and built out in Mexico, and we could have put the drug dealers out of business by giving better wages, cleaner environments, retirement plans, health care benefits, life insurance benefits, disability benefits, and so on. And people don't want to work for them because it's too risky. The risk premium's too high if you build out their law enforcement and everything else. You need to move up the risk premium. And that means better law enforcement makes it much more riskier to do things illegally, and it forces people to do the right thing. That's why I'm for very sophisticated law enforcement and private security as well, where it forces people to do the right thing and it crowds out because the risk premium to do anything illegal is too high, and it forces them into legal industries, and we can take all that labor and reallocate it. Do you know how much labor is in illegal industries in Latin America? And if we could re-educate by forcing them out of those industries and into legal industries, it's incredible. And I'm going to do the research on Tumblr right now and post it and end this video. But again, you have to think of these things.